Sciarc, and last but not least, also here in Dessau.
Recording in progress.
Quite a while ago, but nevertheless, he's been here. He's the co-founder of Digital Futures, which is an online educational platform that provides free and open access to lectures, tutorials, and knowledge related to advanced digital design methods. And he's a former researcher for NASA, where he developed 3D printing technologies for the Moon and Mars, and a member of the European Academy, which advises governments and international organizations in scientific matters. Neil has published over 40 books on architectural theory and digital design, translated into 8 different languages, with his most recent books including Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which is on my desk,
Oh.
and Machine Hallucinations, Architecture and AI, which is a Wiley publication he did together with Matthias Del Campo. Now, please join me in welcoming Neil Leach.
Thank you, and it's good to know that things haven't changed too much in Dessau with the trains, and I was telling Manuel about other disasters along the way, which, I've got to say that I actually had some incredible students when I was here. They came here accidentally somehow. I think because it was in English, because it was free and it was in the Bauhaus and whatever. And I was just walking here from the station and going past the room of one of my students who then worked for Zaha for 7 years, and now she's a doctoral candidate with me in FIU. And last night I was with this super smart Japanese student who, when she was at high school, she won the prize for the top Japanese language student. So anyway, it was an amazing experience being here. People came for whatever reason, and we tried to make it a kind of a poor person's AA. I've been teaching at the Architectural Association in London. I don't know how many architects are here, but how many are architects? A few. Okay. The AA is very famous, right? And but very expensive. And but we tried to do an alternative, and it kind of worked out for a while. I don't know what's happening here now. I've got no idea because all the interesting people seem to have left. But anyway, it was fun. So today I was talking earlier on in Berlin International University, whatever that is, but more straightforwardly about an introduction to AI. And today, Manuel asked for a slightly different version, and it is a different version, really sort of digging beneath the surface, because there's something, I mean, what we're witnessing now is just, to me, quite extraordinary. I'm not talking about Midjourney and DALL-E and all these little tools for making images, but the way in which the culture of AI is taking off and engulfing everything. So I'm going to, this is not a technical lecture. It's a kind of, I don't know, but it's a discourse. If you want to see technical stuff, there's something called digitalfutures.international, which I set up online as a kind of online platform, which is really useful. And it was based on Dessau, because I realized that basically when I was teaching here, the top 2% anywhere in the world were talented, and but they didn't have money to go and study. And the basis of Digital Futures is basically that education should be a human right and not a privilege of the wealthy. So it was inspired by that. And we have online tutorials and lectures and so on in several different languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Turkish, Arabic, God knows what is, and obviously English. The technical stuff is there, and also some discussions about issues such as AI and copyright, AI and creativity, and even I'm a theorist myself, and I'm not going to talk about theory today, but there is also a very interesting, I think, series of sessions we had on AI, neuroscience, and architecture, and there's some really very crazy guys in the world of neuroscience talking about some very strange things that I find totally fascinating. Just to say, one of them is Anil Seth, who's one of the leading theorists, I think, in reading the leading neuroscience of consciousness, and he has this crazy idea that our version of reality is a form of controlled hallucination. But there are other people like Joscha Barker and so on who are equally crazy. So that's an interesting realm. Anyway, today's session, and I'm just going to say a few words, and I'm hoping this is going to keep sort of going in the background. Now, I'm not going to talk about these images because I think the real problem is that people think this is AI. Well, it's an application of AI, but really there's much more to AI. The whole world of large language models, which I will be talking about. But I'm interested in the kind of scandals and the stories that are going on. I mean, what exactly is going on right now? Because in some senses, we seem to be in the middle of a soap opera. We have Elon Musk suing Sam Altman and OpenAI and Greg Brockman over something, which is kind of weird in itself. And if you read the lawsuit, it reads like the first chapter of my book on AI, accounting for a history of AI. And somehow this has become central to everything that we're dealing with at the moment. And meanwhile, every week, every day, even I could say, maybe things are kind of being developed and launched and things, and astonishing, getting faster and faster and more rapidly. Meanwhile, attempts to kind of slow things down have failed completely. It's like we're being propelled into an uncertain future, like on a runaway train with no brakes, and no one quite knows how to stop it. No one knows quite what to do about it, but it's happening. And for me, what is remarkable is that this has suddenly become thrust into the public. Things that I was kind of researching as what I thought as a fairly esoteric sort of domain in some sense, as it was in the past, has suddenly become a central preoccupation for everyone. And it's got to the point that really some kind of theoretical topics about what is artificial general intelligence, which is something I'll talk about later on, which is really kind of speculative kind of theory that comes out of the work of people like Ray Kurzweil and things, has become a central issue within the kind of world of Silicon Valley, of the world of the commercial world. So I'm just astonished by what we're living through at the moment. And AI is all over the place. And I don't know, is it a soap opera? Is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? Is it a tragic comedy, or what is it exactly? It's not totally clear. All I could say is that I think there are going to be a lot of movies coming out from Hollywood, Bollywood, and everywhere else about it. And it seems to be also clear the central characters that appear in this circus, as it were, are also equally evident. People like Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and so on. So it's all consuming, and I mean, it's stranger than fiction. I mean, I find this quite astonishing what we're living through. So anyway, what I want to do today then is not to address this kind of thing that most architects think is AI. I had a discussion yesterday with some journalist in Germany who were doing an article, and they said half the architects in Germany are using AI and half are not. Well, I suspect that every architect is using AI because, frankly, it's all over the place. And those who say they're using AI are probably just using these kind of things, which I don't think in any way is the future of AI in the world of architecture, or more broadly in the world of design. These are just very superficial, two-dimensional sketch pads, as it were, that I don't think have got so much to contribute. I've got a few more slides coming out of this. I'm not, I mean, this is just me testing out these tools. So and I'm sure many of you have already done the same thing and are having kind of fun with these things. What I would say is interesting, I think, is that what I find strange is it's like we're in a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk world, and that you can write a prompt, change the word building and put in the word car, exactly the same prompt, and get a kind of a car and it'll come up in a few moments' time, that looks to me like okay car. I could do fashion, you could do anything, you could do furniture and things. And the real constraint in this world is knowing whether or not it's good. I have no idea whether this car coming up is going to be is any good. I have no idea at all. But it's a strange world, and I think somehow we are all in it together. There's not that much differentiation between the world of architecture and the world of design. We're all kind of in it together. So let me just click through the end of these. Yeah. This is my happy Chinese New Year dragon. All right, so I've just laying out a series of thoughts in a sense. You know, what are we going through? Is it a sci-fi drama, a soap opera, an episode of Black Mirror? I'm pretty sure it is an episode of Black Mirror. Or does it have some kind of feel-good ending to the whole thing? And then alongside this, there is this kind of cast of characters, all male, it would seem from this. Maybe Fei Li should be in there. That have been, you know, they've been playing their role in a kind of a larger than life kind of operation. I want to touch upon these during the course of this lecture as well. And meanwhile, there's also a kind of, I don't know, I mean, the whole thing is completely accidental as far as I make out. That all the planning, all the proposals for what AI might be about from the very initiation back in 1956, nothing really turned out as people had planned. And then we made a lot of mistakes, that things just didn't work. At the same time, what's marked it has been this kind of total accidental history whereby things have accidentally worked. And in fact, in some senses, have worked better than we ever imagined, which itself is a little bit sort of terrifying. And I want to, so I'm calling this a kind of an accidental history of the future, where I think somehow the relationship between the past, present, and future is something we need to really reconsider, because it seems to me inextricably connected. I love the expression, tomorrow, today will be yesterday, and somehow we are being catapulted, as I say, to this kind of new domain. So, maybe to start off with the science fiction sort of part of things, and also in some senses the accidents, because Alan Turing was, I guess, the person who first initiated the possibility of, or first conceptualized of connecting computation with intelligence in a paper he published in 1950. Now, Alan Turing, of course, tragically died in 1954. He'd been found guilty of lewd acts, which was the term for homosexual acts in those days. I mean, he was subsequently pardoned by Tony Blair, but basically he was traumatized by this. And in 1954, we think that he committed suicide. Anyway, he died in 1954. I was brought up with Doctor Who, and I kind of thought that maybe Dr. Alan Turing could have been the original Doctor Who. Doctor Who, after all, like Dr. Alan Turing, is not a medical doctor, but someone with a PhD in science and technology. And I was speculating that this guy, who'd saved millions of people in the Second World War by effectively breaking the Nazi Enigma code, might have been the model for this character on TV who would was saving the world every week on television. That's actually unlikely to have been the case, because in fact we didn't know what Alan Turing had done until the 1970s, when the Official Secrets Act released information about what he'd done. And of course, Doctor Who began in the 1960s. Now, at the same time, so historically it couldn't be the case, but then again, Alan Turing is a Time Lord, and maybe the normal rules of time don't apply to him. Anyway, one second. Okay. So there are a series of these kind of unfortunate mistakes. First of all, we thought somehow AI would be easy. This was the notion that when AI was launched in the term artificial intelligence. I mean, Alan Turing never got to hear the term artificial intelligence because it wasn't around at the time. It wasn't coined until 1955 for an event that took place in 1956 in Dartmouth College in the States, where all the greatest and the best kind of computer scientists and so on got together for a workshop where they planned to solve all the problems in 2 years. That didn't happen. This is Marvin Minsky here, Claude Shannon, who is a very famous figure in terms of information theory. John McCarthy was actually the guy who coined the term. He wasn't very happy with it, but as he put it, we had to call it something. And they were trying to break away from cybernetics at the time. And it's not a great term. You know, it's not artificial. I think it's synthetic. And the term intelligence automatically invites you to anthropomorphize it. So it's not the best of terms. Anyway, when these characters, the survivors, as it were, of this original event, got back together for the 50th anniversary in 2006, they had to sort of admit that they really had nothing to show for themselves. AI had been pretty much a complete failure. There'd been a huge amount of hype and a lot of disappointments that led to what are known as AI winters, when funding was difficult, when nobody was willing to promote it. And this was largely because AI basically hadn't worked. It was launched in the Cold War, and one of the aspirations was that it maybe could be able to translate what the Soviets were saying. It could translate Russian, and it proved to be absolutely useless at that in the early days. There's a famous expression, American expression, "out of sight is out of mind," which when they translated to Russian and back into English, came across as an invisible lunatic. And there's a whole series of jokes going around at the time about how useless AI was. Anyway, so when these characters got back together in 2006, they had to admit that really it had achieved almost nothing. And in fact, they also agreed that it was probably going to achieve almost nothing in the future. As it happened, there were certain developments in hand that actually were going to change it. And paradoxically, 2006 was roughly the time when those developments were going to come out. But this character, Marvin Minsky, is part of the problem. I mean, he's often here. I mean, in some movies, maybe he's the hero, but in my movie, he's going to be the villain. Partly because he was the one responsible for holding up development of neural networks that have proved to be the real breakthrough recently. He wrote a book in the 60s with Seymour Papert about perceptrons trashing basically neural networks and saying they were going nowhere. And that was, that was unfortunate because those who are working in the field basically found it very difficult to get any funding for it. And meanwhile, another accident, a literal accident in some senses, was the death of Frank Rosenblatt, who was a researcher at Cornell, and he was the leading figure developing these perceptrons, and in a boating accident, I mean, the most accidental of all accidents, he lost his life. And with that in the book itself, it was clear that that AI that neural networks were going nowhere. And meanwhile, towards the end of his life, Marvin Minsky was literally caught with his pants down, as it were, in the kind of the Epstein scandal that engulfed MIT Media Lab, including Neri Oxman and others. Anyway, so he's the villain in my particular kind of movie, shall we say? And this is the guy who's the real hero, Geoffrey Hinton, who comes from a long line of distinguished figures from the UK. His great-great-grandfather was George Boole of Boolean geometry fame. He was somebody, actually, he studied architecture for 2 days at the University of Cambridge, which was where I studied. And then he realized that architecture was not for him. And I put this to one of my colleagues who works at Foster and Partners. She said, "He's smart. It took me 5 years to realize that architecture was not for me." Anyway, he went into the world of neuroscience. He was basically interested in in the mind and the human mind, and he actually became an AI person expert by complete accident. He was just developing a neural network and he found himself in AI rather than neuroscience. But he had a real problem in the sense because in an age when neural networks have been trashed the whole time, he basically, in order to get anything published, he had to scrub any reference to neural networks in his publications in order to get somewhere. But unlike Minsky, he was somebody who was incredibly principled. He didn't want to go to MIT because of the military connections there. Much of the research there was funded by DARPA, and he was particularly concerned by one particular incident where they were doing some research into minefields that healed themselves. In other words, if they were disrupted, they would heal themselves. And that to him seemed to be such an oxymoron that a minefield could heal itself. He ended up going to Canada instead, to Toronto, where he set up a real interesting sort of foundation. Anyway, that was kind of he ended up there in this accidental sort of world. But it was really large to another accident, that AI suddenly started working, and this is because of the invention of graphic processing units, GPUs, which weren't invented for computers at all. They were invented for gaming, and it just so happened they discovered that they could make computers faster and better, more powerful, and all of a sudden neural networks started to work. But this was another accident, it hadn't been planned. Anyway, so when we're talking, this led to what's known as the deep learning revolution, connectionism. Well, I should say there were 5 different approaches towards AI in the early days, in those first 50 years, of which symbolic AI and connectionism were the 2 leading ones. Symbolic AI being based on logic, and connectionism based on neural networks, and symbolic AI was in the ascendancy. Anyway, eventually these neural networks began to work, and they went to work in an incredible way. So when we're talking about AI today, we're pretty much talking about deep learning. We're talking about when we're talking about ChatGPT, Midjourney, and so on. It's all Sora. It's all essentially deep learning, and that I would say it could be understood as a subset of machine learning, as a subset of AI itself, like Russian dolls nested inside each other. But it's deep learning that's really making the huge breakthrough. And in fact, while it was around the year 2000 that GPUs were being developed, and eventually they were helping in the world of neural networks, it wasn't until about 2012 that really everyone woke up to this possibility. And this was largely because of a competition that Fei Li, so maybe I should have put one female figure in that cast of male figures. Fei Li organized a competition for, and she was at Princeton, now she's at Stanford, it was a competition to try and recognize images. Now, we all take that for granted, right? We've all got facial recognition on our phones these days, but back in 2012, when that was not at all the case. And anyway, Geoffrey Hinton and his team of PhD researchers came along with their neural networks, which was like an obsolete technology. It's a bit like, having a steam engine or something like that. And everyone was kind of joking about it, but by an incredible event, they absolutely wiped the floor in this competition. They thrashed all the opposition, and all of a sudden, everybody turned around and said, "Of course, yes, I always thought neural networks were the way forward. Of course, I always believed in them," which of course they didn't. But that was the moment, really, of the deep learning revolution. Fei Li, in her autobiography, right? I think she's exaggerating a little bit, shall we say? But she writes, she says, this was extraordinary. It was like the world's speed record was beaten by 100 miles an hour. That's 160 kilometers an hour by someone driving a Honda Civic. I don't know if that's the case or not, but that's the way that she put it. And certainly, all of a sudden, people thought, oh, neural networks. So what's happening here, basically, deep learning refers to the number of layers in a neural network. These are called neurons. These are called synapses, and they're connected, and the flow of information is going from left to right and governed by weights that control that. Now, it's called deep learning because of the number of hidden layers. It could be anything up to 5,000. But what happens in this process, the pixels then process through, and eventually we come up with the conclusion it's a bird. We're never 100% sure, 99% sure, but it's a bird. Now, that was kind of, in a way, quite remarkable. But the real holy grail for the world for computer science was to do the opposite, to actually start with the word bird and actually hallucinate or synthesize or synthesize the term they use, or generate an image of the bird, which they discovered actually by accident again. They were just playing around with this. A guy called Alex Morvintsev, who was from Russia, and he was an engineer in Google, realized that you actually could simply invert the network. In other words, you could change the direction and actually generate an image, which led to this very trippy result, what's known as deep dream, where you've got a neural network that's trained, it looks like, on serpents and dogs, and that looks like an oil lamp or something, and it's reading that into whatever it sees. Now, the problem is, well, it's trippy, and actually there is a paper by Anil Seth, whom I mentioned, where he compares this to narcotics and other mind-altering drugs, and there is a connection in some way. But I'll simply say that the problem here is that it's all over the place. It's what they call pose invariant. We've lost any information about where these things should be positioned in the process of in that whole process. Now, eventually, actually, I've jumped. Okay. I missed out on something here. Let me go back a bit, just before I go into that. In fact, what happened, the next step in the process, I've lost a slide, was the development, again in Canada, but in Montreal, of something called generative adversarial networks, GANs, as they call it. And GANs worked by having two neural networks play off against each other. I'm not quite sure what I've done with those images. Anyway, never mind. And this really was much better. They were able to come up with something really quite convincing, all fake images in some sense, because that's what it's doing. And what happens basically is that there's a generator and there's a discriminator. The generator takes random noise and produces images which the discriminator judges against the data set. And in that process, either rejects or accepts, and in that process trains the generator to produce better images. And that produced some amazing effects. But meanwhile, in architecture, I don't know about the world of design, but in architecture, we were way behind, way behind. And in fact, in 2019, I teamed up with someone called Refik Anadol, who is, I think, well, he's now a rock star in the world of media art, and with Zaha Hadid Architects. So we were sponsored by Google. And the proposal was I was going to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale and go from kind of Alan Turing onwards through Geoffrey Hinton, talking about this kind of the British contribution. And we were planning to hallucinate buildings, and which had never been done before. And we got nowhere. We got absolutely nowhere. We weren't even shortlisted, and there was shortlist wasn't exactly short. There were 9 on the shortlist. Anyway, Refik decided he was going to do anyway what we proposed him to do. So he trained again on all the data set, all the images he could find of Zaha Hadid Architects, and it was a long, laborious process, and eventually came up with something that got out of the computer that, in a very crude way, sort of vaguely resembles something that Zaha Hadid might have designed. And this, I think, is the first ever GAN-generated image that just comes out of the computer. And that was the image that I used on the front cover of my book, The Architecture and Age of Artificial Intelligence, that came out in December 2022 and was actually 21, was out of date within about 6 months because that's when diffusion models took over. Diffusion models being based on a very different process. Diffusion has been used both to erode an image using Gaussian noise and then to repair it again. And there are these massive pre-trained generic neural networks that work, as we know, from text to image. I thought I had some image of this, but I don't. Never mind. Anyway, so along the way, I mean, one of the things I would say is a constant refrain in this whole process is that human beings have underestimated AI. Nobody ever seems to think that it's ever going to be as good as humans. We're so smart after all. And this was a seminal moment when Elon Musk realized that the richest guy in China was a complete moron. Elon Musk makes it, I never in my life say human beings will be controlled by machines. It's impossible. Human beings can never create another thing that is smarter than human beings. And then Musk responds, I very much disagree with that. The biggest mistake I see people making is to assume they're smart. People underestimate the capability of AI. They sort of think it's like a smart human, but it's going to be much smarter than the smartest human you will ever know. And I don't know when he made this comment, but it's been absolutely clear that that is the case since then. And again, this happened in 1997 when Gary Kasparov took on IBM's Deep Blue. Nobody thought Gary Kasparov would lose. He's one of the greatest chess players of all time. And of course, a stupid computer would never beat it, but of course it did. Ray Kurzweil predicted it was going to be by the year 2000. It wasn't. It was 1997. And at first, Gary Kasparov thought that it was cheating, and eventually recognized it wasn't cheating, and then came up with this comment, which I think is probably true. We just have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us. I mean, true in some senses, in that AI is good at some things like chess, and not at others. So it's not it's not happening all together, but eventually, I think that probably will be the case. But maybe the biggest kind of shock in that sense was not then, but several years later in 2016, when the next challenge was to take on the world champion, not at chess, but at Go. And this was DeepMind in London, Demis Hassabis, one of the great geniuses, he should be in the list actually, put together with David Silver this AlphaGo, which is a program that the challenge here basically was it's fine with chess to use the old-fashioned expert systems. But the problem when you got into Go is that actually, although the moves are kind of straightforward, the complexity of the game is such that there are more potential moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe, which means that effectively you have to go beyond expert systems and go into learning systems. Even if you put all the computers in the world together, they wouldn't be enough to deal with this. So anyway, again, nobody thought that Lee Sedol was going to lose. Of course not, especially Go, such a kind of potentially complicated game. The guy on the left is simply the one making the moves on behalf of AlphaGo. And Lee Sedol was kind of like the Gary Kasparov of Go. He was a genius. And nobody imagined that he would possibly lose. But something happened in this match which really shocked people completely. In fact, there are a series of moves that were called slack moves. They didn't realize they thought they were kind of glitches, and only later did it become very clear how remarkable they were. But there was one particular move in game 2 that really shocked the entire world. And this is Lee Sedol after game 2 saying, yesterday I was surprised. Yesterday after game 1, I was surprised. But today, after game 2, I am speechless. So something happened in game 2 that really blew him away. And actually, you can't reduce it down to this, but this is almost the most famous moment in the entire history of AI. And it's move 37 in game 2, when AlphaGo puts the black stone here. Now, I've never played Go before, but apparently you don't put a stone on the fifth line so early on the match, either the fourth or the third line. And this was a move that never been played before, and everybody thought it was a complete mistake. It was another computer glitch. No, ridiculous AI. No one's going to beat Lee Sedol. How stupid! What a stupid computer. Well, as it happened, about 100 years later, these two black stones joined up with that black stone, and it won the match, as though it was thinking 100 moves ahead, and human players can maybe think one move ahead at the most. Maybe it wasn't, but anyway, this caused consternation into the point that that even the commentators thought that it was a computer glitch. These are the two commentators for the match.
The Google team was talking about is this kind of evaluation value of that.
Well, that's a very surprising move.
I thought that was a mistake.
But it was no mistake. And if we thought that was impressive, the next generation was really even more impressive. AlphaGo 0 was, I guess, approaching AGI because it wasn't just able to play Go, it could also play many other games as well, including chess. And it beat AlphaGo 100 games to 0. But the most impressive thing, and I think this is what we should have taken more seriously at the time, and we didn't, but it was a kind of harbinger of the future in the sense we began to see this, and this is what's so disconcerting now, is that it was doing things in a very strange way. AlphaGo 0 taught itself to play Go without being taught the rules of Go. I don't know how the hell it does that. It basically looked through this huge database on which it's been trained. What's more, it did it by playing a huge number, 3.9 million games of Go against itself using reinforcement learning in 3 days. Now, 3.9 million in 3 days, that sounds like a lot, right? But actually, when you think about it, it is a hell of a lot. It's basically 20 games of Go per second. Now, this is a hummingbird. I live in LA, and we have lots of these things. And of course, this is a slowed down video of a hummingbird. It's beating its wings at approximately 3 beats per second. Imagine 7 times this. And what we should have noticed here, there's something rather worrying about this, the fact that it is so quick to learn, and the fact that it is learning things it was not trained to do, that effectively is really what has been terrifying people ever since, that somehow AI is way more capable. It's doing things it's not expected to do, and that's really part of the Black Mirror world in which we operate right now. And of course, underestimating AI and also overestimating human abilities. Lee Sedol made this comment afterwards. We thought we were so creative, right? Okay, and he basically says AlphaGo showed us that we're not really creative. AlphaGo could do way more. In fact, eventually, Lee Sedol, 2019, gives up the game of Go because he says that AI is an entity that cannot be beaten. I don't think that was the most significant thing about this particular match, I think what was most significant was that, the AI was operating off the spectrum, as it were, compared to humans. Those of you who've got dogs will know that dogs have a greater sense of smell and hearing than we have. They can hear things we can't hear, they can smell things we can't smell. I think AI is just doing the same with let's say, intelligence. It's way off the spectrum. And in fact, Mo Gaudet, who's a former chief financial officer at Google, has made the prediction that in 10 years' time, AI is going to have an IQ of 1,600. 10 times that of Einstein, and we have not going to have absolutely any clue about what it's doing. We just will not be able to understand anything. Well, this kind of leads us into both the positive and the negative side of it. The invention of large language models was largely based on accident again. Some scientists some engineers in Google had developed this thing called the transformer that used attention to basically to train the model, and they were kind of working with it, but didn't realize the true significance of what this was. But the guys at OpenAI did, and out of that they managed to train these things called large language models, the GPT, in other words, in ChatGPT. And this is, in some senses, one of the great success stories. It's also the real source of the Black Mirror episode, in a sense, in terms of AI, because what they have managed to achieve. I guess what I just put it down to literally just describe very quickly what these large language models are, and this is really the interesting. These are the significant things to talk about. They don't sound very sexy, doesn't sound very interesting, and large is an understatement. We're talking about gigantic. These are pre-trained neural networks that are trained on absolutely enormous databases consisting of trillions of bits of information and billions of parameters. And what is really strange about these things is that they do things they were not trained to do, like AlphaGo Zero, and we don't know why. And they do it not because they're computationally very sophisticated. Apparently, there's only about 200 lines of code in a large language model, but somehow the more the data, the more they exhibit what they call emergent capabilities. And that's a little bit disconcerting. And as every year with their training them on 10 times more data, that means every 2 years, 100 times more data, we're somehow propelling ourselves into a future where we don't know what these things are capable of. So we're already getting a hint of the the kind of Black Mirror side to come. The launch of ChatGPT, actually, I was astounded to hear about this, but this was completely accidental too, in the sense that they were launched at the end of November 2022, and OpenAI, at the time, they were aware of their competitors, that they were producing new things, and at the time they're working on GPT-4 that was being incredibly racist and coming up with some horrible hate speech and things. They can't release this. This is just impossible. So what they do with these large language models is they then get human mechanical Turks, as it were, to kind of to train them and to get rid of all this hate speech. And I think I forget now. There's a story now that there's. I'm not sure. I think it's India, where a lot of the mechanical Turks come from India. And in India, they use maybe it's wrong. Anyways, whatever country it is, they use the word delve a lot. And as a result of that, they put delve in everywhere. So you can now recognize what is being generated by ChatGPT because the word delve appears over and over again. But anyway, these large language models, they basically thought, okay, we've got to do something because our competitors are doing something. So what should we do? Midway through November, so it came out, I think, 30th of November. Midway through November, they suddenly said, well, okay, why don't we launch just to test out the market, not GPT-4, but GPT 3.5, and let's make it into a chatbot. And they basically put into an existing framework. Nothing special was done. They called it a low-key research review. They just thought, okay, let's just see what happens. And of course, the whole world explodes and the rest is history and so on. But this was entirely accidental. And there were lots of kind of memes going around the office about the jokes about low-key research review. Right, okay. And Anyway, so this is a problem, right? That we got these tools that can do all this incredible thing, and people are kind of panicking and saying, "Oh, but hold on a second, but how do we slow this down a bit? Because we don't know what these things can do, and anyway, there were attempts to try and slow down the AI race. In particular, there was a letter that was launched by Max Tegmark of MIT as part of the Future of Life Institute, where he basically calls upon everyone to sign it, including all the great and the good like Elon Musk, to ask everyone to slow down research in these large language models, which of course is a ridiculous thing to expect. And this is the letter itself. We call on AI labs to immediately pause for at least 6 months the training of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. And if you notice the bottom sentence here, this doesn't mean a pause on AI development in general, merely a stepping back from the dangerous race to ever larger, unpredictable black box models with emergent capabilities. This is the term they used for the fact that these large language models could suddenly translate languages, could suddenly write code. And they do this effectively by finding patterns in the data. But this is kind of worrying, because how the hell did they do this? I'm writing a paper right now trying to explore whether these follow the term emergent, which is a concept by John Holland, where he talks about the way that unpredictable bottom-up things behave. I won't go into that now, but simply say that they were worried that about this. So they signed this letter, they issued this letter and signed this letter, which was completely ridiculous. I mean, it's a bit like telling the leaders, the two leaders in the Olympic marathon to slow down. Of course, they won't do that, because the other competitors will catch up. And when you've got Microsoft and Google competing against each other, there's no way either of them are gonna slow down. So it was an absolutely absurd thing. Then we get into really the kind of soap opera itself, and this I don't know what to make of it, really. But I put EastEnders down there. This is really the soap opera. The problem with this is basically, I mean, the way it started is this, so actually it's not just, there's also another guy, I forget, no, I didn't include his name, I should have done. But Elon Musk suing Sam Altman and OpenAI. And what is so interesting is this kind of theoretical term, artificial general intelligence, has now become foregrounded. And it's like, I don't know, when I was writing my book, first of all, it was very confusing because nobody could agree on what the hell AGI was. Some said it was a bit like strong AI, it was AI with consciousness, others didn't. But it's become clear, I think, how it's being treated, at least in the industry right now. AGI has been defined in some sense, not least by OpenAI. And anyway, when they set themselves up, they set themselves up as a not-for-profit organization that was meant to be open source. That was the idea. They were particularly alarmed by the fact that DeepMind in London had been acquired by Google, and they could see this kind of corporate takeover. So they set up OpenAI as in opposition to that, as a non-for-profit and so on, with the idea of focusing specifically on AGI, artificial general intelligence. And they give a definition here: AI systems that are generally smarter than humans in various domains, not one domain. And again, here they refer to it as the system that can solve human-level problems. Basically, that can outperform humans in a variety of tasks. Anyway, what happened along the way is that they kind of realized that you couldn't really compete as a non-for-profit, and you basically had to get much more coming in, billions of money. Elon Musk had been the primary contributor to OpenAI, and then something happens. He basically what basically happens is, okay, that it's kind of complicated because they're written into the statute of OpenAI is they can help other companies until they reach AGI, but they're not for profit. Now, what happened is Microsoft took over, and this is precisely what Elon Musk was objecting to. And I don't know if he's joking or not, but a few weeks ago he said, well, provided they call it closed AI, I'm happy, and I'll draw the lawsuit. But the point is that basically, this is the definition, right? OpenAI is a non-profit artificial intelligence research company. Our goal is to advance digital intelligence in the way that is most likely to benefit humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. Since our research is free from financial obligations, we can better focus on a positive human impact. So things began to change. OpenAI was licensing to Microsoft on the basis it hadn't achieved AGI. So to the bottom here, most critically, the Microsoft license only applied to OpenAI's pre-AGI technology. Microsoft obtained no rights to AGI, and it was up to OpenAI, OpenAI's non-profit board, not Microsoft, to determine when OpenAI achieved AGI. So AGI was the thing they were kind of worrying about. So anyway, eventually they got to the point that, you know, it was clear that the AGI, sorry, what was that previous one? So effectively, they began to sort of realize that it was beginning to achieve AGI. And this is the big question. You know, once it achieved AGI, and it was very clear that it was scoring incredibly well. I don't know how the hell it scores 77% in an advanced sommelier's examination. That's wine tasting. And God knows how AI does that. But it was clear that it was really going beyond this. And even Microsoft acknowledged this. Everyone knew that it was kind of somehow close to AGI or was AGI, and that became the issue. So what happened then? There was a big kind of I'm going to skip through this one to this one. So there was another incident which basically Sam Altman gets fired. And the real reason behind this, it seems that there was one particular person in OpenAI who was worrying that we're just racing ahead with no concern for safety, and that this was dangerous. Now, we weren't to find out who that was for a moment, but he was fired, and there was a reshuffling because it was going out of hand. Now, the problem was that Microsoft had such control over OpenAI at that time that they basically said, no, we want him back in. This is the guy who's possibly the whistleblower, Ilya Sutskever, who was concerned, Israeli-Russian, the chief scientist of OpenAI, who was worried about the fact that with disregard for safety, we were hurtling into this future and in this kind of way. Anyway, what happens was that Microsoft put pressure on it, and Sam Altman then gets back in charge as the CEO. They changed the board entirely so that they're all kind of yes men on the board. And as a result of all that, Ilya Sutskever eventually leaves. Everyone was saying, I think it's Sutskever who's the one who's the whistleblower, and sure enough, it was. So anyway, this is the soap opera that's going on, and of course, now who cares? Without Sutskever, they're not concerned at all about safety, so they're literally hurtling forward in this kind of strange way. And there's more every day on this. So anyway, now we're really getting into the Black Mirror episode. First of all, the realization that AI will lead to job losses. And the mistake we'd made was basically thinking that the white collar workers, the engineers, the architects, the designers, the doctors, the lawyers, and so on, were the ones who were safe. And the real problem was going to be the blue collar workers, the factory workers. We'd all seen these photographs of these factories where not a single human being's in sight. And these work well, these robots, in a very controlled environment, but they're taken out of that controlled environment, they're actually not that effective. They have, I don't know, if I were to put a bunch of Lego bricks on the floor here and ask a robotic arm to stack them, they have the kind of motility of like an 18-month-old kid. They struggle to do it. Meanwhile, AI has been racing ahead. ChatGPT can write code and so on, whatever. So it's clear that actually this is not, it's not the factory workers who are going to be liable. It's going to be the white collar workers. In fact, what they do at Amazon packing centers now is they have these robotic kind of vehicles that bring the materials to humans who do the stacking, because that's what we could do that is better than AI. We do the stacking. So that's what we've been reduced to. The second mistake is thinking that AI won't replace humans. Well, no, of course, it's great that we have this. This is Elon Musk talking about how we've all become cyborgs. You have a machine extension of yourself in the form of your phone, your computer, and all your applications. You are already superhuman. And what's interesting is this has been borne out in some ways by research. This is by academic sociologists at MIT and Harvard, where they did a study of people using ChatGPT, and they came to the conclusion that basically on 3 different scales, in terms of the quality of the work produced, in terms of the quantity, and in terms of the speed at which it was being produced, those using AI outperformed those who were not using AI by a significant margin. It's about 30 or so %. Now, this is a very crude diagram, but it's possibly the most important thing that I'm showing you today. The blue mountain, those without not using AI, and the green mountain, those who are using AI. Now, the problem is that there's been this expression that drives me crazy because everyone keeps reciting it. AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace those without AI. That is really very deceptive. It's really very deceptive because it assumes there's a one-for-one correlation, that one person using AI will replace one person without using AI. But we know, and this is, I know it's the graph for the quality, but the same happens for the quantity and the speed. So basically, one person using AI can do much more quickly than one person not using AI. So that's not the real thing. What it's more likely to be is something like this. AI won't replace humans, but 3 humans with AI will replace 5 humans without AI. And that's for the moment, and God knows what it's going to be in the future. That's based on that particular statistic. Now, in terms of architecture, I'm sure in terms of design, you can't talk so generally about this. You need to basically break it down into particular tasks. But trust me, in terms of, let's say, things like rendering, I mean, there are no jobs for renderers anymore. That has simply gone completely. Now, just to say, I know not many architects here, but this is, I think, of the three issues, or the 3 drivers of change in the world of architecture in the future. We haven't seen the software launched just yet, but because I happen to know one of the leading figures in the field is one of my students, I know exactly what they're thinking about. Everything's going to be based on data. It's going to be based on automation, and it's going to be based in optimization. I know from having been at a conference in Austria where there was some of the guys who had been working on the America's Cup are now working in commercial shipping. That's what they do. They don't sketch anything anymore. If they're going to design a ship, it's based on data, and it's all generated by AI. And sometimes it looks a bit ridiculous, and they go and test it out and actually find it works. This is the world that we're being catapulted in, not sketching, but based on basically data and AI. And this is, I think, kind of interesting in a way because it's a sign of things to come. This is the work of Wan Yu He, who is my doctoral student, as I mentioned, in FIU and also in Tongji. And I would simply say that she started off by working for the Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas, and was really frustrated because she was studying in the Berlage in Amsterdam, worked in Rotterdam for him, then worked for him in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, they had an office in Lang Kwai Fong, which is the nightclub area. And they were working late into the night till 2 in the morning and all their weekends. And downstairs, people were kind of in the nightclubs. And when you got really frustrated, this is absolutely absurd, completely wasteful. They were doing sketches that were thrown away. Nothing was kind of retaining its information. So she basically decided that she was going to do something about it and set up a company in 2016 when the Chinese, because they're Go Plane Nation, realized that there was that they needed to catch up because of this Sputnik moment, as they call it, from the Leach thing. And there was investment into these companies. She got investment for a company called XCool, which means X-Koolhaas. And then more recently, they have a diffusion model, which they've launched, which is trained just on architecture. And it's kind of interesting from that point of view, architecture and architectural terminology. So there are terms like specification and architecture that don't mean much in the other outside, but they're able to harness this. So just as AMO, so OMA is the firm Office of Metropolitan Architecture, is flipped around to become AMO. So they took their term XCool and flipped it around to produce LookX, which is their diffusion model. Anyway, this is this project that they won in a competition against 200 other architects for a museum cultural center somewhere in China. And what they're doing here is using topological optimization to break down this form that starts off as a rectilinear form, and gradually it's eroded by this process. This is to do with wind comfort, but it could be based on many other things. And what it eventually produces is something that is more akin to, say, the language of someone like Frank Gehry, these kind of organic forms. Now, what is so significant about this is that a week ago, this was constructed on site. This is the first constructed example of a generative AI-based process. So it gives you a clue about what we're going to be doing. I mean, based on data, it's going to be automated and it's going to be based on optimization. So that is the future. So I think that the Black Mirror thing came in when we realized that AI could train itself on these things and could learn to do all these things to translate languages and to write code. This led to Yuval Harari, who is kind of interesting because he's not a technologist, but he says some interesting things, intelligent things, that he says AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization, by which he means it's learned how to write. And once you can write, you have enormous power because you can persuade other people. What I would claim is that AI has hacked the operating system of designers. It's learned how to design. It's learned how to design architecture, and I'm sure it's learned how to design other things. Now, those of you who've used Midjourney will know that you work with prompts. I actually use, I don't know, for whatever reason, long prompts, 70 to 80 words. And this is not recent. This is Midjourney 5.3. And in the prompt, you put references into the quality of the rendering, the lighting conditions, and the details and so on. It's lots of words about that. But the only references to architecture in this prompt, the only references to architecture were basically ultra-contemporary minimalist villa in the Austrian Alps. Nothing about, in the background, I've got these mountains. Oops, hold on a second. How do I do that? Nothing about the mountains, what they look like, or that valley. Nothing about the boulder in the foreground of the grass. I didn't say anything about that. I didn't talk about the materials of the building or the form of the building. It was Midjourney. Midjourney has effectively learnt how to design. Not every time, and frankly, most of the time it's pretty useless, but it's learnt how to design. Or this one, ultra-contemporary stainless steel kitchen. I didn't tell it to put this painting in the background. It's quite a nice painting. And I didn't tell it to put this bush here or these things here or this coffee maker. I just put ultra-contemporary stainless steel kitchen. It did it all. Or this. I mean, I don't know how long it would take anyone to render this. But Midjourney did it in 3 seconds. So it's learnt, it's hacked, I think, the operating system of a designer. Now, if that's terrifying, this is more terrifying. This is Sora. Sora has not been released yet, but it's been developed by OpenAI. It's been tested by a number of individuals, one of whom I came across in my lectures. And it's a game changer. We've had text to videos since late 2022, but this is way, way better than this. It's able to maintain consistency for up to 60 seconds. And as you'll see in a moment, it has a real quality of the detail, resolution that is truly remarkable. This is an absolute game changer in terms of text to video. And maybe they're cherry picking these things, but I mean, this is just, everyone's been blown away by Sora. And it's basically very similar to a large language model. It's the video equivalent. Instead of using tokens for words, they use patches for videos. And it's based on a huge corpus of data, absolutely enormous corpus of data. And it's working like the large language model. Moreover, it's also displaying these so-called latent capability, emergent capabilities. It's displaying things that it wasn't trained to do, and it's showing itself capable of this. One of these the concepts that's in computer science is a notion called occlusion, Occlusion refers to when something is in the frame and then disappears out the frame and then comes back into the frame again. And you can see in this video of it's going through some, I don't know, it looks like Tokyo suburban, whatever it is, that all of a sudden we lose it and we get a reflection and we see ourselves or whatever now, and then we see it back again. Not quite the same, but pretty convincing. So it's able to do occlusion. And that's one thing. But what I find terrifying is its capability to do 3D. Now, this is a moorhen from New Guinea, and the resolution is pretty astonishing, But just wait until it turns its head, because then you begin to realize that its capability in terms of 3D is something truly exceptional. So I'll just wait a second and we'll get, yeah, there we go. Now I've been on a lecture tour of 32 different lectures all over the world, and I can't give away, because I shouldn't say who it was who told me, but there was in one of the faculty in one of the places I went to has been testing out Sora. And he's obviously on a non-disclosure agreement. He's sworn to say nothing about it. And I kept saying, well, what about, is this doing 3D? And he said, I can't say. So I said, well, what if you were to say, instead of using the word is, you could use the word might be or could be or something like that. So I persuaded him to come up with these things. And basically what he was saying was that that we've been able to understand 3D largely through photogrammetry, but the problem has been the lack of data. But the sheer quantity of data here is meaning that we're actually getting to a point where effectively we're getting 3D. Now, of course, a designer, an architect say, fine, moorhen, okay, but it can't do design, can it? I mean, it's not as smart as us. I mean, the typical sort of view that most architects come with. I once wrote an article for Design. Well, someone wrote an article for Design and said that we haven't got to worry about anything, have we? These AI will never beat us. And I wrote them and said, what are you talking about? I mean, how do you know that for sure? And anyway, they then invited me to write an article, and I wrote this article, although I wrote it with ChatGPT, shall we say, and it came up with some astonishing comments, which is quite amusing in some senses, and including the comment that those who don't use AI will be sleepwalking into oblivion, which I think is a wonderful comment. But I got two sets of comments. One was from the people who knew about AI, said, yes, of course. And then there was a bunch of people who knew nothing about AI, who were being absolutely pompous. There was one architect who said, there's not a single AI software in the market that could possibly match my ingenuity and creativity. Well, that guy's going to be the first to go, because actually what happens with Sora is it can do just that, right? This is Sora, text to video. This is an interior, and I don't know what the text is. I don't know anything about this, but all I can say is this is pretty mind-blowing, because, I mean, it's a bit bourgeois, this interior, but still it has been generated by Sora. And we can expect in the future something more special than this. We had a debate on digital futures where Patrick Schumacher, we started talking about the metaverse for some reason. And Patrick was saying, well, of course, with the metaverse, you need human designers. AI is never going to be doing this. And Wan Yu said, no, of course it's going to be able to do it. And now we can see that Wan Yu was right. Realization that AI is superior to humans, that maybe AI can even think. Now, the problem I think with a lot of the commentary by people like, I don't know if you know Ray Kurzweil, is, but he kind of, it's a bit simplistic, the discourse. He kind of makes some comments like talking about AGI versus human intelligence, as though there is this monolithic thing called human intelligence. I think Geoffrey Hinton, who's already known as the godfather of AI, or at least deep learning, is the one to pay attention to, because he has a background in neuroscience. In other words, he doesn't just talk about intelligence, he talks about the various cognitive skills. So, for example, we now know that ChatGPT knows 10,000 times more than us, but knowing is not the same as understanding. And understanding is not the same as thinking, and thinking is not the same as reasoning, and there are different forms of reasoning. And so he is far more instructive in my mind, or more convincing, when you start talking about these things. So let's just hear, I mean, I agree totally with Geoffrey Hinton, by the way. Let's just hear what he has to say and why he actually, he was working for Google and he quit Google so he could tell everyone else why he was so terrified. He's one of the doomers, and I'm probably a doomer as well. So here we go.
It made me realize that these digital intelligence have something we don't have, that makes it much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others. That's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right? And that's what things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to a chatbot, and we talk for a bit. The answers it's giving me seem a bit strange to me. And I suddenly realize that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realized it thinks I'm a teenage girl. Was that a metaphorical use of the word think? Or was that just the same way we used it? And I strongly believe that use of think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realized maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it will be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm at Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent. And if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
Sorry about the voice in this video not being synced up there. It wasn't my machine. So what he's basically saying, when he talks about the Palm being able to explain a joke, you know, he asked Palm to explain a joke and he explained it very well. And he figured that if it can explain the joke, it must understand the joke. So it's not just knowing things, it actually is able to understand. And both he and Blazer Guriakos at Google are convinced that ChatGPT and Palm understand when they respond to these questions. It's not just predicting things; it actually is understanding the context of a sentence. Now, what he's basically not saying here, but he does elsewhere, he basically thinks that AI has got a different form of intelligence to human intelligence. It's a mechanical intelligence as opposed to a biological intelligence. It's mechanical and as opposed to about the biological intelligence that we have, but he thinks that it is superior. And I think this is the important point. And one of the reasons why it's superior, as he mentions here, is the fact that it can learn so quickly that one computer can share with 1,000 other computers. Now, the model we had before of what we thought was what we used for exponential growth was Moore's law. The idea that Gordon Moore back in the 60s observed that the number of transistors on a circuit board would double every 18 months and the price would come down by half. We thought, well, that's fantastic. Look, it's amazing, you know, and we're talking exponential growth. We're not talking 1, 2, 3, 4. We're talking 1, 2, 4, 8. Well, that's obsolete now because these things, first of all, the data on which things have been trained is going up 10 times every year. So that means 100 times every 2 years. But what he's saying, basically, the capacity to learn, it's basically one computer can tell 1,000 others. Now, during COVID in the UK, we had a thing called the R number. Maybe you had it in Germany too, I don't know. And if the R number was less than 1, it was good news because it was not spreading. If R number was more than 1, it was spreading. Well, we're talking about an R number of 1,000 here. This thing is really potentially getting completely out of control. Now, if you're not terrified enough by that, then I want to show you Yuval Harari, who should really terrify you. Okay. Oh.
This is the end of human history, the end of human-dominated history. History continues with somebody else in control. In 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new gears independently. Maybe they'll be nice. Maybe they'll solve cancer and climate change, but we're not sure. I'm tending to think of it more in terms of really an alien invasion, an alien fleet of spaceships coming from planet Zircon or whatever, with highly intelligent beings. This is what we are facing, except that the aliens are not coming in spaceships from planet Zircon, they are coming from the laboratory. If the humans are divided among themselves and are in an arms race, then it becomes almost impossible to contain this alien intelligence.
So the reason why I like the term alien intelligence, that it prevents us from anthropomorphizing things. And I think this is the real problem, that we have adopted an anthropocentric view and we look at it from our terms and rather than what it is. So the term alien intelligence, I don't suppose you read my book, but it's catching on. And I think this is really pointing to really the problem. I think that we have made the mistake of looking at AI from our terms and thinking, oh, that's stupid AI. It's not even sentient. It's not self-aware. It's not self-conscious. Rubbish. It's useless. We're much superior. Well, the question is ultimately, if ChatGPT knows 10,000 times more than we do already, and these things are learning so quickly, what would they think of us if they could think? But so, by the way, just go back to Geoffrey Hinton. I think the one thing I disagree with on Geoffrey Hinton is the word think. I think whenever you're using these terms, you need inverted commas. I think intelligence, inverted commas, thinking, inverted commas, learning, inverted commas, all these terms. So I don't know whether AI could think, but I don't know what the word would be, but what would you think about us? So I gave a talk last year in Warsaw. Nicholas Copernicus came from Poland. Of course, he famously told us that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but rather the Earth goes around the sun. I think we need a second Copernican revolution, and we need to recognize we are not the center of intelligence in the universe. Now, here's a nice side, the happy ending, because I want to basically say, but we shouldn't panic. Despite all this, and it's a bit terrifying, don't worry at all. I was brought up with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if anyone else has read this, but it was the cult book and movie at my time. And what's interesting about this is there is a giant supercomputer that is tasked with coming up with the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And of course, famously, it comes up with the answer 42. So they go, what is the question? And this is why, for Elon Musk, this is a book about philosophy, it's not a science fiction. We need to get the right question in order to get the right answer. So then it takes another 9 million years or something to come up with the question. Now, I think that GPT has probably not only learned to understand languages and to write code, it's probably cracked the cultural genome, shall we say, to human beings. The only difference between deep thought, I think is the name of the computer in Hitchhiker's Guide, and GPT is that it took deep thought 7.5 million years to come up with the answer, whereas GPT comes up with the answer in 3 seconds. But don't panic. This is on the back cover of the book. Don't panic. And I want to just kind of finish off on a very reassuring note. Arthur C. Clarke. What is amazing about Arthur C. Clarke is that he recorded this in 1964, so 60 years ago, and yet it sounds as though he's talking exactly like Geoffrey Hinton in 2024. So I'm sure the voice in the video is not to be synced, but let's hear what Arthur C. Clarke has to say reassuringly about these things.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's futures. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely think their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we're now at the beginning of organic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
Inorganic, he was saying. I mean, sorry about that. But basically, he's saying that we're now going into a mechanical, an era of mechanical intelligence. My conclusion is this. When I was in DESA, I wrote a book, or I published a book with MIT called Camouflage, which is about adaptation, about the human capacity to adapt. And I think this is extraordinary. I mean, I don't know, I've been changed every day. I get a stay in a different hotel. By the morning, I've adapted. And I think we human beings are incredibly adaptive creatures. Neuroscientists talk about the brain being plastic, and that's why we can adapt to these things, how we can adapt to new tools, and so on. And we are adaptive. You know, if you think about it, you know, can we even remember what it was like before we had mobile phones, handies? You know, it wasn't that long ago when they were invented. Can we not even remember before we could have facial recognition? Probably not. And can we remember the age of fax machines? I mean, there was a time, horrible things, but they were there, and it wasn't so long ago. So we have this capacity to adapt, and we even forget about the past. We don't even remember what it was in a pre-handy era. That's going to happen in the future. There's going to be fewer jobs, absolutely clear. Fewer jobs, and we're going to be operating in a different sort of way. The whole design process is going to be reconfigured, but we'll get used to it. That'll be the new normal. We're incredibly adaptive. And maybe just to illustrate that point, if someone had told me 50 years ago that in 50 years' time, most marriages would end in divorce, I would be thinking, oh my God, end of civilization, end of the world, what's going to happen? But most marriages do end in divorce, and we're quite okay with it. So there'll be a different future. It'll be a future with less work, and we won't even remember what it was like in 2024. So I'm going to finish on a very British note. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Neil, really. Thank you for this amazing talk. Question, other question, I have many, I could continue chatting now for the next hour, I guess, but maybe other questions from the audience, from the students.
Yeah.
This is a lot to take in, so I think I want to start with a really minor question.
Are you a designer or an architect? Okay. Okay.
We're talking about a website or something when you mentioned that you were going for this architecture instead of technical.
Yeah, yeah. It's on there, digitalfutures.international. And you can go on there, and there's a link to different languages, and there's the English, and then the YouTube channel where and it's difficult to navigate it. We have something there called the Doctoral Consortium, which I'd set up, and I mean the main idea behind it is basically the PhD students on the whole are working with 2 or 3 people with a professor distributed around the world, whereas actually you could have a global platform, and why not? You know, so we did some things. I mean, they're not just technological things. We have a series on architecture and philosophy, but it could be design and philosophy, frankly. And you suddenly can do things on that platform that you can't do elsewhere. So we had a session on Jacques Derrida, and we brought in Peter Eisenman and Bernard Schumi, who were very famous figures in the world of architecture, collaborated with Derrida, and then someone called Doina Petrescu, who did our master's with Derrida and her PhD with Helen Sixu. And we had this debate, and actually that is the way forward, frankly. You know, I could have a series of lectures with Akim Mengiz doing robotics or whatever, and you could get the best people in the world, have a single platform, and why not? I mean, particularly now with AI, it's very difficult to find people who even keep pace with these things. So anyway, but that's what we put it up there, and it could even work for undergraduates. Why not? Why we? I think education is in need of a real kick out the backside. Personally, I think many of its techniques and methods are 200 years old and completely obsolete. But we put our stuff up there, and they're available for everyone. We don't pay anyone anything, okay? So we're volunteers ourselves, but in the end, everyone wants to share their passion, and nobody's said no so far. So yeah.
I think you got a lot of input from really different people and a lot of people. What was one occasion where you were thinking, oh my thought about this? This will change my view about.
I don't know. Actually, at the very beginning, for example, I sensed this dark side of this thing, and I was working on one book, and I for Bloomsbury, my publishers in London, they do the Harry Potter books. Anyway, but and I persuaded them. I said, listen, I feel compromised. I'm dealing with something that's incredible, but it's terrifying at the same time. And I persuaded them to do a white book and a black book. So the white book has come out. The second edition has been submitted. It's probably out of date by the time it's published. And the black book is the Black Mirror episode of it. And so I think I got that right. Other people have been saying, no, we're safe. We're architects. We're geniuses. No way I could possibly do. And of course, I think they're completely wrong. But I don't know. I think what I would say is that, you know, I don't pay any attention to architects or designers, frankly. You know, there's stuff out there that's kind of interesting. I think that Lex Friedman, I don't know if anyone follows Lex Friedman's interviews, but you know, they're actually super interesting. And what you get is a few slips of the tongue where people say things in unguarded moments. It's like Sam Altman said, there's something going to come out this year that's going to blow your mind. And you think, oh, what is it? Like GPT-5 or what? So I would say just delve a little further. And I mean, don't think about this in terms of mid-journey. It's absolutely meaningless mid-journey, but the systems, except that it has capacity to design, right? I mean, but the systems behind it are just really totally astonishing. And you know, there have been so many setbacks, but all of a sudden things are working, and they're working in a way we never expected. Nobody has expected ChatGPT to be good as it is. And we're kind of, I'm terrified, and I think many people are. There are a few others who aren't, right? But I'm in the doomer category. I think it comes because I'm from the UK, and we love EastEnders and all that kind of, you know, stuff, gloomy stuff. Yeah.
I find it tough to catch up with all the information, and since I'm a designer, I only try to catch up with the design part, like what's new AI design tools, what could I use, what can I integrate in my design process, and how would you go, how would you do it as a designer to catch up with information, stuff like that?
Well, I mean, first of all, be suspicious of everyone. They all promote themselves and say, we're the best at anything. And because I know Wan Yu and I'm talking to her, she's telling me that they only think that this, it's called SpaceMaker, they're now called Forma. They're the only competitors out there. And most of this stuff is actually not that special at all. But the problem is that nobody's saying anything because they don't want to let their competitors know. I mean, I'm getting from Wan Yu, I'm knowing what they're doing, and I could say that, but she won't let me show their material. I can't show that. So all I can do is show you what I can show you. So there's something going on and it's going to come out fairly soon, next year or so. And to begin with, it's going to be super unsophisticated, and you're going to think, oh God, that's useless. But then it'll pick up very quickly. You know, I think that's the point. So they're talking particularly in terms of fabrication of going from data to fabrication, using these kind of prefabricated modular units that they describe as being Lego bricks, but they're not Lego bricks. They're smart, you know, whatever it is. They're super smart things in which they're digitally tagged. So it'll be a different sort of world out there very soon. Yeah, I don't know what to say. But be a little bit suspicious and go beyond the immediately obvious and try and dig further. Yeah.
Well, maybe I have a question. So you mentioned your book Camouflage, which I think it's one of the best publications. I haven't read all of them, but I really love it. And then you said, okay, we're really good in adapting as humans. So we can change if something changes, we can adapt to it and we can evolve. I think we're rather slow in adapting. Of course, we can adapt, but it usually takes generations. And usually, every technical development, we have generations to adapt. Where we can see that in yesterday's election how good we deal with change in Europe in general. And then we have AGI knocking on the door. I mean, Kurzweil says we will have it by 2030. I think Elon Musk has a similar kind of time span. Sam Altman, I think, even thinks it's going to happen in 2026, which is like 2 years.
No, Blaise Aguriakis thinks it's happened already.
Oh, it's already happening?
Yeah. Several people it already happened. Yeah.
We have an intelligence, an alien intelligence, something that we absolutely don't understand how it works, which is better in anything that we do, or will be better in anything that we do. And I think in a recent interview between Bill Gates and Sam Altman, Gates was raising the question of purpose because he invests a lot in malaria research. He wants to heal the world from malaria. Now, if there is an intelligence that is better than him and solves that problem faster, his purpose is gone. Like his meaning in life is gone. I think that's the biggest question. Like how do we adapt to something? How do we deal with something that takes away our purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we'll find new purposes. That's all I could say. I think human beings have kind of they're boffins and they have kind of pastimes and hobbies and things that they'll be focusing on. I don't think that I think we'll adjust and just find new ways of operating. I think there will be those without a sense of purpose, just as there are now, frankly, especially in Dessau maybe. But it's I don't know what the answer to any of these things are at all. All I'd say is that at least if you point out a problem, it's a different kind of problem. It's one that you can begin to address rather than one by which you're trapped. So I'm just saying, watch out, basically. And I've got no clue what's going to happen. And I think I would say one thing you can't predict. You can predict a technology. You can design a technology to do a particular thing. I mean, for example, the mobile phone was designed for a particular thing, but actually they thought it was going to be for rich businessmen. But actually, when the rich businessman gave the phone to their daughter who's going out in the evening and say, give me a call when you want to come back and I'll come and pick you up, all of a sudden things changed. So we don't know how people are going to inventively use these technologies. And I think that's where the invention comes in, especially for designers. It's not about new sexy forms, but actually understanding new ways of operating. Because I do think that the mind of the designer, and I'm assuming it's very similar to the mind of the architect, because we kind of diagram things, right? We visualize things very, very clearly. And I think that gives us a certain advantage. I mean, for example, TED Talks were invented by an architect designer, right? We can imagine scenarios, and that's the challenge for the future, to try and visualize what that future might be. So I'm not without hope that it's going to be, interesting, but it's not going to be if you follow what's happening now. That's the real problem, and especially, I don't want to say anything about this school of architecture, but I mean, there are some places that are full of dinosaurs, right? And that really worries me in terms of education. When I've been dealing with this, talking this thing, it's the pragmatic people who are really addressing AI. It's the construction companies. Turner Construction in the States, the biggest construction company, Ferrovial, the Spanish supergiant, they are taking this really, really seriously, along with with certain architectural practices. Foster and Partners, they are taking it seriously. What I've noticed is, frankly, educational institutions, some of them are just dismissing it entirely. And that is really worrying. I mean, I studied at Cambridge, and we had a professor there who told us to read Martin Heidegger and told us that technology was alienating and all this nonsense, right? We weren't allowed to use computers in the studio. So what happened was the smart students all used computers and then did this kind of fuzzy overlay to pretend they did it by hand, right? And then the bad students just didn't use computers. They were unemployable. They were unemployable. So I think we've got to really grasp that thing and try and think what it is for the future, design our future, as I was trying to say. So especially for designers, and I'm not sure what it is, but that's the design challenge in some senses, not to design a product or a building, but to design our very futures. And you're right, it's changing really rapidly. I faced this with my book. I don't know it's going to be out of date before it's published. I really don't. I try to get on top of everything and send it in quickly, but who knows? Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Things are changing rapidly, and we're not going to keep pace with that. But those who are aware of that are going to be in a better position than those who are not. Yeah. I mean, I don't know who's teaching here anymore, but I mean, there was a famous case of a professor, right? And when he was first teaching, he would pack out the auditorium. And at the end of his career, he had 6 people in the front row, and that was it. And he said, I don't understand what's going on. I'm teaching exactly the same material as I used to. I mean, that's the point. Education needs to evolve much more rapidly than it is. Maybe I could finish on an anecdote. Oh, so your question? Yeah.
So you were talking about purpose, and that we assume need to find a purpose that machines can do anything or AI can do anything. what do you think about purpose and like what is the idea of an AGI when it comes to purpose? Is it like is it self-aware, or will it be self-aware? Will it be like intelligent enough, or like willing to have purpose, or will it still be us humans that give tasks and that will be the purpose, or or is this completely off the table? So what are your predictions?
Well, I mean, at the moment, it has no purpose. It has no sense of meaning. We are meaning-making machines. That's how we invented religion, to try and explain these things, right? It has no intentionality. It can't decide what to do just yet, but who knows whether it's going to develop that. So I don't know for sure. I mean, all I would say is that there was a moment, and I'm forgetting the name of this Google engineer, but there was a big outcry because he thought that it was becoming sentient. And it was particularly embarrassing because he was at Google, and Blaise Buriakos, his boss, had said something similar, but not quite the same, saying I'm getting a bit nervous about this because it's appearing to be, whereas the engineer said it is. And now I'm not so sure whether people are so convinced of that. And certainly, even if Geoffrey Hinton's saying it can think, I mean, they're at least acknowledging that we're getting closer to that than we thought we were. And I don't know what to say. For the moment, no, but who knows what it's going to develop. I mean, what are these emergent capabilities? How do we understand what they are? I mean, just simply say that the term emergence, and I don't know whether it is connected with the term emergent, but John Holland was a guy who wrote about emergence a while back, and we can observe emergent phenomena in nature the whole time. Flocks of starlings, for example, the kind of the murmuration of starlings, very beautiful, right? Shoals of fish and so on. We see this all over, but no one's explained it yet, and that's the real challenge. We can't explain some of these things, and we can't explain why these large language models are doing these things either. So maybe it's just a mirage, and then so on. We don't know. But this is interesting. This is where the debate is at the moment. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but yeah. Yeah.
I also got a question. Thank you very much for the presentation. My brother's doing his master's, and it's about AI. And he told me, like, because you said about the parallels between neuroscience and AI.
Yeah.
And he said it's kind of like teaching a kid, like, to do stuff or to learn stuff. And now I'm curious what's now the neuroscience, what are like the inventions or like the.
Well, I mean, without going into so much detail, there are some wacky theories out there, which I find very entertaining, and they're by serious scientists. I mean, there's a guy called Joshua Bach who's from Germany, and he's descended from the musician Bach, and he was working in MIT and Harvard, and now working in Silicon Valley. He kind of believes that we're in the Matrix and everything is kind of like that. I mean, it's actually, well, anyway, there's a whole series of debates, and these guys are very intelligent and very interesting. All I would say in terms of AI and neuroscience is that the kind of the key figures in the world of AI, Demis Hassabis and Geoffrey Hinton, being two examples. They did PhDs in neuroscience before going into AI, and Anil Seth did a PhD in AI before going to neuroscience. So basically, both are looking at the question of intelligence. And I just find it a fascinating domain. I don't know what the hell to make of all this, but there's some incredibly interesting debates going on there. And I think essentially, I mean, I guess when I was here, when I wrote that book on camouflage, I was interested in continental philosophy and post-structuralist theory and psychoanalysis and so on. I think the new debates are cognitive science. So it's neuroscience. There's a kind of a philosophy that comes out of that. People like Andy Clark, for example, they're super interesting people. That's really where the debate is now, and AI as well. So, and the point is about psychoanalysis is, Freud supposes there's the unconscious, but doesn't prove anything. Now, people like Anil Seth are at least doing some kind of experiments that are trying to test these things out, and I think it's more rigorous. So there's a new kind of epistemological shift happening, I'd say. Yeah.
Maybe one question. Let's imagine we reach AGI, and then my question was, will there be like more AGIs than just one? And like, if there is like two AGIs, will they working together, or let's say one AGI has to protect our system and the other AGI has to like hack the system?
No, I think it's the condition of AGI. It's not a particular. They're not about a particular AI. They're talking about the condition. And there was a genealogy that they plotted out, we went from human level intelligence through to AGI through to super intelligence eventually. That's the worry when you've got these machines that are so intelligent they just design other machines, and that's the last invention that we make. So it's about a condition rather than necessarily particular softwares. So that's it's a bit confusing, but yeah, that's it. I mean, I think what's happening now, they're developing personal AIs, which I think is going to be very interesting. There's a guy called Mustafa Suleyman, who's just become the head of AI at Microsoft, and he was developing in Silicon Valley these personal AIs, which I don't know how we'd relate to these things. Are they going to become like an alter ego that we kind of play off against or whatever? But anyway, it's a mystery, but I think it's going to be fascinating. I, for one, looking forward to it. Just to say, somebody once asked ChatGPT whether or not I was more positive or negative, and apparently I'm 66% positive about AI. So, and I am. I think it's exciting, and we are going to lose jobs, but it's going to make huge advances in the world of science and medicine in particular. I think it's going to be incredible for sure. And even in critical theoretical approaches, I gave a lecture in Melbourne. One of my former students from Dessau actually was in the audience, and he was using, I don't know what it was, but some AI that was basically listening to the entire lecture, and he asked it to come up with a question. And this question was really amazing. So it's going to help us do even things like history or theory and things. It's going to be incredibly useful.
So there is probably like slightly overused quote that the future is already here, it's not evenly distributed. So do you think that with access to AI, is it going to polarize society even more? Or is it actually going to help us also in terms of like maybe the blue collar jobs getting more significance versus white collar jobs diminishing? Is it going to completely like restructure society?
Well, I think the good thing about this is, I mean, I think you've got a few robotic arms here, right? In Dessau, and this has been a struggle, right, for places like Dessau to get robotic arms. And rich American universities have been of hundreds. Well, with AI, it's kind of free, pretty much. I mean, GPT-4o is apparently free, and it's actually quite democratizing in that respect. That anyone could get it in Africa or whatever. Obviously, you have to have the bandwidth to get it, but I mean, it's not that. When it's free, it makes a huge difference. I mean, one part of the problem is that the software that we have at the moment, particularly Autodesk, is governed by the shareholders of Autodesk, and they're pushing the prices up, and they don't care whether the people in Africa can afford that or not. And that's, I think, very, very negative, So, I think it will potentially be democratizing. The real problem, of course, is that when we get to a stage where, we are losing jobs, there must be some mechanism to share the wealth. And they're talking about universal basic income coming in. Now, fine, but I don't know how you're going to, I mean, Google and Microsoft are protecting their income very well right now. And I don't know how you're going to be able to kind of extract that from them. So it's not going to be so easy. So I think there is going to be polarization between the haves and have-nots. These companies are going to be generating huge amounts of wealth, absolutely enormous. They are already, right? And the salaries in that sector are extreme. So, I on the one hand, it's going to help because it's going to be like electricity. It's going to be everywhere, and it's going to be largely free. But at the same time, I think it's going to have a huge impact on certain industries and certain individuals more than others. Yeah.
Well, maybe as a follow-up to that, because you also mentioned education and just said, I don't know who said that before, but super intelligence would be last thing mentioned. We have to make another itself, basically. So what is the last thing we need to teach?
Well, I mean, actually, we had a series of debates about teaching itself on digital futures, and we had a guy called Sanjay Sama, who's in charge of open learning at MIT, and he basically said, well, actually, there's more information on YouTube. And the idea of a professor coming along and just kind of disgorging this information and handing it on is completely obsolete. And in the session with Sanjay Sama, there's someone called Aretia Markopoulou, who's in charge of IAC in Barcelona, and she says we have to be curiosity stimulators. We no longer have that role to kind of to do that. So, you know, maybe we don't teach as such. We just point people in the right direction. But, you know, frankly, just to kind of make it clear, you know, I think in the world of architecture, it's professors who've got to be worried more than anything else, because if we don't need so many architects, let's say we need half the number of architects, we need half the number of students, therefore half the number of professors. I would also say that the 5 years we have for studying architecture right now, once you've got AI, you don't need 5 years, you need 3 years, right? So if you put that all together, we're going to have 30% of the professors that we have at the moment. So just remind them when they're being pompous, okay? So
Well, Germany, we're a bit safer than in the US, I guess.
yeah, well, I think you've got lots of, I mean, despite the train system, at least you've got relatively free education.
Okay.
But maybe I'll just finish with one thing, one anecdote, because when I was here, when I first came to teach here, there was they made a poster, and very beautiful. My students made posters, and described me as an architectural theorist. Now, the technician, who was known for not for being very open-minded in his political comments, shall we say, and I wouldn't go further into that. But anyway, he was a nice guy, in other words, but he didn't know any English, and he saw this word, this description, architectural theorist, and in his German, he kind of read it because he can't understand English. He said, architectural terrorist, and ever since then I've like to think of myself as an architectural terrorist. So I hope I've terrorized you today.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much again.
Yeah.
When you coming out?
You know, this is really a problem. Right? It takes 12 months. Maybe it's made quicker because I made clear that some have been proof edited before, and I added some other text on it. I hope it's going to take less than that. I think if it's going to take 10 months or 9 months, I handed in 2 months ago, then it's going to take 7 months. But it really, I mean, books, they should be like Google Docs these days. They have to be some way of updating things because they. But maybe
yeah,
I'm a.
but look out, follow him on Instagram and check out his books. We have some of them in the library here, but they're really worth reading, definitely.
Yeah.
Even though some of them might already be out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll take this out here without.